everyone, and welcome to our podcast stroke web chat. Today is going to be the first of the five short podcasts that we're going to be doing to support Mental Health Awareness Week. So specifically, we are looking and exploring mental well-being in the workplace. So my name is Asha Berzin, and I am the founder of Mindability Hypnotherapy. How did I forget the name of my own company? Small business.
Take a breather.
Yeah, I know, right? I help small businesses to improve resilience and emotional well-being in the workplace. And I do that through education, training, and one-to-one therapy. And I'm here with Erica Burke, who is the owner of HR Department Solihull, an outsourced HR service provider to local SMEs. So we wanted to do this web chat stroke podcast because we are aware that slowly the economy is starting to reopen and people are starting to get back to work. But yet we continue to live in this shadow of the pandemic, and there's been so much change over this last year or so, and it's affected us all in different and varying degrees. But one of the biggest things that has emerged that's been quite positive is that there's a real recognition that we need to start protecting our mental well-being just as much as we protect our physical. So being in the lockdown has benefited some, but for others, it's created a whole new set of issues and challenges, and potentially exacerbated an already difficult situation for others. As you can imagine, being isolated, being away from family and friends, being called upon to provide extended care to the young, the ill, the vulnerable, because they've not necessarily had the support of agencies. Losing loved ones, not being able to grieve for them properly, feeling fearful of the virus, feeling anxious about money and job worries. So all of these things have created this additional pressure and this stress that while people are still trying to maintain their employment. And we're mindful that the roadmap out of lockdown and out of the pandemic continues to evolve and unfold. And we know that businesses are really keen to return to full speed. But we are a little bit concerned, and we want this to be seen as an opportunity, as a catalyst for creating change, a change in the working culture so that we can start to support staff mental wellness. So over the next few days, we're going to be exploring subject matters that might not have always traditionally sat or been part of discussions in the work sphere. So specifically, we're looking at domestic abuse, we're going to be looking at trauma, parental care and, what is wrong with me? Parental and carers burnout, alcohol misuse and boundaries. So we're hoping to look at providing some broad definitions, providing some examples of how organisations can incorporate these into the workplace, but also how individuals can help themselves, and reflecting on some of our personal experience where possible. We really want to promote awareness because good mental health in the workplace, we know, always begins with preventative measures. We know it makes good economic sense. Both Erica and I are not experts in these specific matters by any stretch of the imagination. We're good at what we do, which
Absolutely.
is and education and therapy. But we have chosen these specific subject matters because we have seen that there has been research that's showing that there is an increase and there is a prevalence in these matters. And we're anticipating that our clients, businesses, individuals are going to need some support in these areas. So please do give us any feedback on the platform that you're watching this on, or email us, or we'd even appreciate any suggestions for any subject matters going forward as well. And if you want to learn more about what Erica does or what I do or how we can support your staff to have good mental health at work, then please do contact us directly. There is a caveat though. Please be aware that the matters that we're discussing are very sensitive, and please do look after yourself. So if you're interested but you want to take some time listening to it, then please do so. They'll be there, they'll be ready whenever you want to access them. So please be mindful of your own well-being. So today we're going to be talking about trauma. So I'm going to pass over to Erica because I feel like I need a breather.
Actually, I'm glad you've just done that, because I was just about to ask you, before we go into the subject, do you want to just tell us what you actually mean by trauma? Because I might think of it something different to you, and so might other people who are listening / watching.
Okay, so I think first to begin with, we know that trauma is a very normal response to an overwhelming experience. And I just want to point out that, you know, we don't choose to have trauma. It's a really instinctive reaction that we have no control over. And what the easiest way to understand trauma is that it's when the survival part of our brain feels really overwhelmed by the situation. And then the body responds, and the brain will respond in whatever way it sees fit. And usually what happens is that there's a disruption in the brain functioning and working the way that it should. And what, as a result, can happen is it disrupts the way that the brain processes it, and it doesn't become a consolidated full memory. So a widely used definition is by Giller, and Giller says that trauma is extreme stress that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. Now, this is a definition that is much more useful, and it's widely used by trauma responsive organisations, your counselling services, your charities. In terms of how we react when we're experiencing trauma, Mind, the charities, categorise it as freeze. So when you've experienced a very overwhelming situation, you find it really hard to engage your body in any way. You're frozen in time. You're unable to move. You flop. So you almost like become almost like jelly-like, because you just completely disengage from everything and you just do whatever you're being asked to do. You fight. It is what it says. You fight. You flight. So you run away, you hide, you move out of the way, or you fawn, or you befriend. So in other words, you try to please somebody who has the real potential to harm you. So that's generally, I mean, that's quite broad. So
no, yeah, but it's really helpful using those. I like that sort of freeze, flop, fight. Was it flight and fawn?
Yeah.
God, I remembered. So how prevalent is trauma, and how might it present itself?
So that's really interesting, because I believe, from speaking from some of the charities I work with, that trauma is probably far more common than we think. I think historically we've associated it with, big traumatic events. So witnessing a car accident, having come back from being in the war in some shape or form, difficult births, just to name a few, the kind of typical things that we hear about. But what we do know, and that's why Giller's definition is really interesting, is actually trauma doesn't have to be a really big significant event in that sense. It's more about, it can be a single one-off event, it can be an accumulation of things. So I mean, if you just think about this entire year, there are plenty of people who have been completely isolated, and that's been really difficult for them. So in terms of the impact it's had, it's been a very overwhelming situation. Frontline staff, parents who are working all the time and trying to be looking after their young as well at home. So it's much more prevalent than we think, and it doesn't just sit in the usual parameters, like I said, how we used to traditionally see it, which is, you know, death, violence, because yes, they do occur in those situations, but they can actually happen in much more in other situations where you might not necessarily perceive it as being as threatening.
So okay, so why do you think people need to understand about coping with trauma?
I think the thing about understanding about managing trauma or responding to trauma is that responses to trauma they're very different for different people. There is no definitive list, so I can't tell you, you know, if a person displays 6 of these things, they're definitely experiencing trauma, because it can be a whole heap of things. And generally speaking, they will fit in that, the effects that I talked about from Mind Charity. So they will tend to fit in some of those categories. But it could be things like flashbacks. It can be developing OCDs, phobias. It can be avoiding social settings, sorry. It can be withdrawing from relationships. It can be developing inappropriate relationships. It can be becoming hypervigilant. It can be muscle, joint ache, violent outbursts, aggressions, inability to concentrate. I mean, the spectrum of what it looks like is very, very different for different people. And so I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that it's never going to be, you know, this is what it looks like in a nice little neat package. I think the other thing for us to be aware of is that it also coexists with other conditions, you know, so it might be anxiety and depression, and then we have substance misuse as well. So there's a lot of stuff that's there. And I think when I work with clients on a one-to-one basis, it's really important to understand that when you're working with a client on a one-to-one basis, there is no end goal. So it's not, this is where we're hoping to get to, because it's just a journey. We're helping that person get to a place where they feel like they can be productive, they're functioning, and they're leading the life that they want to lead, and that they're able to manage what they're experiencing. Because trauma essentially is perception-based. Not everyone, for example, who experiences an accident will have a trauma. You know, so you can have two people in exactly the same accident at exactly the same time. One will walk away and feel, okay, that was awful, and I'm really annoyed because I'm not going to have a car for the next 2 weeks. And the other person will really be traumatized by what they've experienced. And this very much comes down to, if we're talking about mental health, what people will recognize as the stress bucket. You know, that container, that stress container. If your stress container is full, most clients that come to see me, when the trauma has taken place, it's because their stress bucket has already been quite full. So their mental capacities, their abilities to be able to manage have already been quite stretched. And it's the one thing that then just makes them feel like, right, that's the thing that's taken me over the edge.
So, you know, if we take it back into the workplace then, yes. So do you think managers need to understand trauma? I mean, is that what they need to do?
So I think it's about being mindful about what you're asking, because one of the things that we know about trauma is we don't want to be voyeuristic. We don't want to ask somebody details about, well, what's wrong with you? I mean, that completely is the wrong language to use anyway. But we don't want the person then to feel like they're being re-traumatized. But at the same time, as a manager, you don't have to be a counsellor or a therapist to help them in their journey. It's just about being human, you know, just being aware that you can help somebody by being kind and being empathetic. So just take your time to speak to your members of staff to help understand what would help them to feel safe at work.
Hi, Mommy. Oh, yeah,
I'm not saying anything.
Thank you very much, babe. I'm half tempted to leave that in.
Oh dear, sorry.
Parental burnout, there you go, right there. We'll have to start again.
Sorry, did you want to finish what you were saying?
Yeah. So, I've forgotten.
You were just talking about, you know, it's important that people understand their staff members. You were saying something along those lines.
Yeah, I think what we need to understand is that you don't have to be a counsellor or a therapist. You don't have to get into the full, you know, what it looks like, what happened. We don't have to do that. I think we just need to be human. So being empathetic and being kind towards each other, because we know as humans, we understand that one of the things that works best for us is social connection. You know, that's how we are designed as humans. So taking the time to ask your members of staff, you know, what works best for you, what's going to help you to feel safe when you're here. What can we do, excuse me, you know, and helping them to identify, for example, little things that will make their day much more manageable, but also asking them, you know, a manager asking their member of staff, you know, if you're not feeling like you're in a great space, what would that look like? Because then if the manager knows what that looks like, they can then support the client they can support that member of staff to activate those little strategies so that they can then be in a good space. So a person who's struggling, you know, that might help them through the day might be listening to music that anchors them, you know, good music that reminds them and takes them to a good space, breathing exercises, being consistent and making sure that they take a break and going out physically out of the building for a walk. And ultimately it's doing whatever it is to help you remain functioning and productive, but also engaged and feeling that you're, you know, that you are having, you're making a difference.
Okay, that's really helpful.
So I mean, I guess as by the sounds of it, like I said, most of my clients that I deal with trauma tends to be frontline staff, and that's where most of my clients actually tend to come from. So what sort of traumas, Erica, would you say in your experience might staff experience in the office setting at work?
I mean, you know, I suppose it's much of the same in many ways that you've spoken about. I mean, you know, we're all going back to work, whether that's into a physical workspace or we're working at home or we're in some sort of hybrid or we're still on furlough. So you've got, you know, people in lots of different stages of work, if you like, at the moment. But people will be carrying some of the baggage of the last year with them. So, you know, if you people who haven't had the opportunity to grieve properly for loved ones, you know, people would be uncertain and worried about their jobs. You know, if they're currently on furlough, they might be thinking about, am I going to be made redundant? There could be conflicts at work. You know, you've got some people who've, you know, been at it full pelt all the way through the last year, and you've got others who've been on furlough. And, you know, when those two get together again, there may be some tensions in the workplace and some potential conflicts. You know, if people have been, you touched on it briefly earlier, but if people have been at home on their own or with only one or two other people, and suddenly go into, you know, public transport, they're in busy environments, it's crowded, that can feel quite overwhelming. So, you know, people are, you know, it might be things around, you know, who's been vaccinated, who hasn't been vaccinated. I don't want to catch anything. I'm worried about not being safe. So all of these things are things that I think that as people return to work and what we sort of call normality, you know, everything doesn't just flick back to the way it was before. Now, trauma's existed naturally, but just in terms of thinking about, you know, the sort of post-COVID type experiences, they're not just going to go away. So they're the sorts of things that I think staff going back into their workplaces are likely to be carrying with them, and we need to be aware of those things.
It's so important, isn't it? So what do you think HR and businesses can do?
Oh, I could barely hear you.
Oh, sorry. So I said that's really important, isn't it, for managers and organisations to have that. So what do you think HR or businesses could do?
Well, I mean, it's really difficult because, you know, obviously an employer isn't going to be able to prevent trauma, you know, because people experience that, as you said, in whatever walk of life. What employers can do is give staff access to the ways that they can better cope with the trauma. And again, you know, you touched on some of these things, you know, they can get feedback from staff about how they're feeling, and that way they can help develop some strategies. So I don't know, for example, if somebody's anxiety is triggered because they're worried about the environment's not safe enough, or that people haven't been vaccinated, something like that, then it may be important for the the employer to make sure that there is sufficient information, they can see any risk assessments, that they can demonstrate everything that the company is doing to make sure that that employee is safe. So it's providing that reassurance, but getting people talking about it, being as open as possible with staff. You know, when people are working at home and they might be feeling isolated, they've been feeling isolated for a long while. Perhaps if you've decided as a company that you want to go virtual, then for some people that will be a huge change. So, you know, what things are you going to put in place to make sure that people don't feel unnecessarily isolated or alienated from their work colleagues? There's also a thinking about, well, you know, we recognise that, you know, for many businesses, you want to get slap bang in and get going. It's been, you know, desperate to get back to business. And the temptation is to just go full pelt. And again, there could be a risk that some people will be overloaded with too much too quickly. So we have to think about, well, how are we going to settle people in to the workplace? It's, you know, it's not all on the managers, obviously. There is things that the individuals can do, but from an employer's perspective, these are the things that you would facilitate somebody better managing any trauma. EAP, employee assistance programs, so confidential helplines, somewhere for people to talk to, you know, someone that people can talk to, counsellors, or, you know, external support like you, Asha. You know, it depends what's necessary. You know, you could even have a situation where, you know, because lots of managers will be in similar situation and leaders. And, you know, if they were to even try EAP themselves, that could show vulnerability, and it could help encourage staff to, you know, to access some of these things. And it helps with shifting that culture. Yeah. You know, there are so many tips that we can share, which, you know, we'll be doing over the next few weeks anyway. But things like team building exercises, cross-team working, managers training to understand more about mental health and trauma and how they can help and start a conversation and build trust. All of these things, I think, are great things that businesses, you know, can be doing. But yeah, and of course, employees have to be able to look after their own health and well-being. You know, it's difficult, but, you know, it doesn't have to cost very much. And actually having people taking the time to help support people will actually pay off, because they'll actually be there and they'll be more productive. They won't be going off sick. You know, they won't be distracted by other things. What you're doing is creating the right environment for them to manage and minimize any traumas that they're bringing into the workplace. Be reasonable, listen, be available to talk to them. Yeah, all of these things can help. And as I say, they don't cost a great deal, but they'll save an awful lot of money.
Absolutely. And I really like the acknowledgement that there is nothing wrong with leaders being vulnerable and saying, actually, I've really struggled, because we tend to kind of, sometimes we can do this thing of employees, management, owners, and we kind of, you know, everybody's been in the same storm. There's a great analogy, isn't there, that everyone's in different boats. I get that, but we've still all been in the same storm. So I think it's wonderful that we can accept that actually to help create that culture shift, it's so important for leaders to be able to feel confident to say, actually, I've really struggled with this, and I've had this as well, and this is how I'm managing it.
Yeah, there's no shame in it at all, because
and I think this is where we're normalizing mental health, because we all have mental health. In order for us to have good mental health, the conversation should be no different to how many times did you go to the gym last week, or how many times did you do exercise?
Absolutely.
You know, it's no different.
How are you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the team building exercises and collaboration and everything else, those are so important. And equally giving people the opt-out clauses if it's too overwhelming, so that they know that that's been taken into account. And it's really interesting because I was talking to one of the charities this morning, and we were also talking about creating a safe space. If a member of staff does feel like they're getting that arousal and they're going to feel overwhelmed, that they can have a few minutes to themselves, they can take themselves to a space where they can help regulate their own emotions, because that's what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, just talking about, I mean, this isn't directly a sort of a pandemic related, but a friend of mine went through, you know, they had a sort of an aneurysm and an operation on their aneurysm. And what it meant when they went back to work, that she struggled with things like noise, you know, and it meant she couldn't concentrate properly, and she was desperate to get back to work. And what her employer did, which I thought was really great, allowed her to be in whatever environment she felt comfortable in. So, you know, she moved a laptop, she went wherever she could, because she could carry on working in a way that was safe for her. She wouldn't make mistakes and therefore wouldn't get frustrated, and you know, a boss could still get the job done. And it's thinking about that, you know, not just in the, you know, the way we've previously thought about it. Think about how we're going to get the best out of the people in the room, and we've all got something we're carrying, and if we can make it a win-win, great.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we've already said that education, training.
You disappeared again.
Oh,
Yeah, I can barely hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
You sound like you're in a tunnel.
Oh. Echo. No. Can you hear me better?
Only slightly.
Okay. I don't know.
How about now?
No.
Oh. I'm going to keep going.
Oh, that's better.
Oh, okay. How odd.
I was just going to say, I know previously we've talked and we were saying that education.
Oh, you've gone again. Sorry, I really can't hear you.
I don't know what to do.
Welcome to the world of Zoom and online training.
Well, I can hear you when you say things like that, but yeah, not quite sure what's going on. But never mind. Let's do our best.
Yeah. So I was just saying that when we've previously spoken, we have talked about education and training is going to keep coming up, and we know this.
And I think at this point, actually, having something like mental health first aid training would actually be quite useful, because I know that they cover trauma and some of the signs and the symptoms to look out for. I'm going to take that word away, not signs and responses to trauma, not symptoms. So, you know, in that instance, absolutely. So people recognizing what that could look like, I think is really important.
Yeah, it is. And you know, mental health training, you know, having more people in the workplace, you know, if your workplace, you know, can accommodate that, it's not going to be for all sizes, but the more people who are available for people to talk to, just helps create a better environment that we can manage, you know, people's personal traumas more effectively, so that they don't disable them or, you know, debilitate them, and make it really difficult for them in the workplace. So yeah, that's great, really helpful.
Yeah, and I just want to stress as well, though, that for me, the reason why I'm specifically talking about the mental health first aiders is simply because we're talking about people that might already be in that place where they've experienced the trauma, and so they're coming back to work and they may not know that they've got those signs and symptoms. So if you're a manager and you've had that training, you're able then to at least spot those signs. We're not asking for diagnosis, because they can't do that, you know. That's what this is about. It's just being able to see them and saying, actually, what is happening for you and what can I do to help you? What's going to support you so that you can continue to feel like work is a safe space. So I think that's really important, I think.
That's right. And it's part of creating that culture, because, you know, we both know that, you know, we've had managers in the past where, you know, I don't care what it is, I would never tell them anything. I'd be too worried. So, you know, what we were talking earlier on about helping to create that environment that, you know, that if your manager says, how are you? How can I help you? That you're willing to, if you can, and you're more comfortable to actually say what you would like to help. You know, and be prepared to discuss that. But that's sometimes that can take time to build up that level of trust that, you know, that the company is going to really support you and that your manager is going to be understanding and sympathetic. Okay. So I think we've...
Thoughts?
Sorry?
Do you have any other last thoughts?
No, I think, you know, it always looks like a long list of things, but, you know, getting the conversation going and thinking about the experiences that people have gone through before returning to work is important, because it will help you to think more creatively about what you can do to support them. And as I say, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money.
For me, the one thing I would like whoever is watching or listening to this to take away is a lot of the stuff that we're going to be covering over the next 5 days is, interestingly, it will still come back to the same message, which is be kind, be empathetic, and be staff-led. You know, be employee-led, because if you can listen to what they're asking of you or need from you to enable them to continue to be in work, to continue to function, to continue to be productive, and to continue to keep your business going in a way that's going to be beneficial for you, then it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, you know, it's not, you know, and again, you know, it's not the, you know, it's not a case of we're going soft on anybody. And I know that's the sort of things that some people may see these discussions as, but this is really about saying that, you know, you've taken the time to recruit, invest in these individuals. Absolutely. More now than ever, we need, you know, our staff working well to get us back on track. What we don't want is people not being able to, you talked about the stress bucket being too full. You don't want people not being able to function well in the workplace, because that's just going to set you back. Yeah. So, you know, be a bit more flexible and you'll reap the rewards of your business being successful, and, you know, you'll discharging your duty as well. Yeah. About, you know, the welfare of your staff. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's all from me. I think finally, the only thing I would say is, obviously, if there's, you know, if, you know, you are an employer and you are looking at ways that you might want to help staff address trauma, or what things you can put in place to minimize you know, people's anxieties in the workplace, then please come and talk to us. You know, I do support small businesses. We have lots of experience in this area, so we'd be very happy to give a free consultation, have a chat, and see if there's any suggestions that we can help you with. Okay, that's all from me. Asha, anything from you?
Yeah, brilliant. So just to say thank you again, Erica, for taking the time out to pick this up with me when I was like, Erica, should we do this? Less than a week, let's do it, Erica.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one of the things I do want to say is that if you are interested in developing in trauma-informed practice or becoming trauma responsive, a wonderful charity that I've been working with is RSVP, and they are based in Birmingham. And RSVP stands for the Rape and Sexual Violence Project, and they run half-day courses around trauma-informed practice and trauma-responsive practice. They're both available on Eventbrite. So if you really want to learn a little bit more and understand what you can do to support your staff, your team, then please do look at what is available. And they actually do a whole range of other courses. But it's absolutely brilliant, and I cannot push for attending their courses enough. If you're interested, either for yourself or for your staff, to have some one-to-one support, then please do get in touch with me. Like I said, I do work with individuals that have experienced trauma, and the way that I do it is strength-based. So I look at clients and I look at what they're achieving and how they are managing their responses to trauma, even in the most difficult of situations, and still succeeding in those small ways. So that's it from me, really.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we look
It's
forward.
lovely talking to you, Asha.
Yeah, you too, and we'll catch up tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to do what are we doing tomorrow? Is it boundaries or
Oh,
DV? What should we do tomorrow?
DV? Or is
Okay,
it boundary?
let's do that then. So
Yeah, okay.
domestic abuse tomorrow. So
All right.
take care. Have a great day.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.